the second big tactic that I hear about a lot is what I have coined as manufactured conflict.
Oh, interesting.
So that's a situation where someone it actually aligns to the earlier tactic we were talking about, called dropping the seed. Manufactured conflict is actually someone gaslighting you, creating conflict with you that has an ulterior motive. So what they want to do is put you in a negative light, put them in a positive light because they want something.
This is the Workplace Therapist Show. I'm your host, Brandon Smith. Our topic this week is really unique because it ties into our topic last week. Last week, we had Susan Barber on the show. Susan Barber talked about visibility. In other words, how do you get visible so you get those promotions, you get those opportunities, and how can you create those for yourself? Well, this week, we are doing the natural extension of that. We're going to talk about, now that you've gotten promoted, one of the things no one ever tells us is we're going to encounter friendly fire. We're going to encounter that colleague that's unhappy about our promotion, and they may have abusive or bullying tendencies. So to help us learn how to block those adversaries and spot those behaviors early, I've got my guest on the show, Berta Aldrich. Berta is an award-winning author and senior executive. She is a trainer. She's a coach. She wrote the book, Winning the Talent Shift, 3 Steps to Unleashing the New High-Performance Workplace. In her book, she talks a lot about this particular challenge. When you're an outperformer, as Berta likes to say, you're going to end up with those adversaries who try and block you and have really nasty, toxic behaviors. So we're going to talk about how to prevent those. So listen to our conversation. I took lots of notes, as I always do, and stay tuned to the very end, and I'll share with you some of my highlights. Berta, so excited to have you on the show today. So excited to talk about this topic. It's such a serious topic, and it would be great to be able to say, gosh, the pandemic's happened. I was assuming all this would have gotten cleaned up and gone away, but it's still there. So we're going to talk about how we can address this and really make our workplaces healthier, more productive, and hopefully toxicity free. But before we jump into that, I would love for you to share a little bit with our audience, a little bit about you. What got you into this in the first place, and what's been kind of your career journey?
Absolutely. Well, first and foremost, thank you so much for having me on today. I have been looking so forward to this podcast. The work that you're doing is helping, I'm sure, millions across the globe. So thank you. Thank you for what you're doing. We do need healthier workplaces. And I would say that's really the reason why I'm doing what I'm doing. You know, we all want to find our purpose and what really drives us. And I think as someone who, you know, I started off as a management trainee, worked my way all up into the C-suite, worked my way into the C-suite. And, you know, along that path, what I found was, you know, a great deal of success. You know, I'm what I would consider an outperformer. Everything that I did, I wanted to do it better than what was done before, or innovate to new things that are going to help the most amount of people, and create teams that did that. But along the way, what I also found was this parallel universe of individuals who didn't want to see that success happen for whatever reason. And of course, I thought I just attracted toxicity in the workplace. And what I found was, you know, I had a daughter who was getting prepared to go to college. And I thought to myself, you know, as a mother, I don't want her to have to go through the same things that I did. She was showing tendencies about performance as well. And it really came down to, I think the one thing I can do for her is sit down and write her a book and tell her everything that she needs to know about navigating workplaces, both healthy and non-healthy workplaces. And through that research and process, what I found was these aha moments that completely explained not only my experience, but millions of others across the globe. And as I began to tell other people about it, you know, they encouraged us to publish the book, and the rest is history. It's now been read in over 20 countries across the globe, and has had a lot of has received a lot of accolades specifically for HR, top 100 books of all time for HR, for new leaders, and for executives.
Wow. Fantastic. Well, I think this is going to be a great conversation. So let's go back a little bit. You mentioned kind of in your career that, always kind of pride yourself on being an outperformer. And then at some point, you looked around and realized not everybody's excited for me.
Yeah.
Was that always true? Or did you notice there was a certain level you hit in your career where that became more commonplace?
It was level-based. And I think once you make that transition into the true mid to senior level executive ranks, people compete with you and you don't even know it. And so I think that internal competition, that over competition is what I call it, actually is what creates the toxicity. And the individuals, based upon my research, the individuals who are actually perpetrating the toxicity, what I call imposter leaders, and imposters because they're not really leaders at all. They're very self-motivated and want to ingratiate themselves with their wealth or their power within the workplace, and they use the workplace to do that. The other individuals are left to become a shell of themselves. And so when we talk about the pandemic, this is why you're seeing, mental claims up 40%, why you're seeing 40% of women leaders who now want to leave the workplace. It's not just the difficulty in our personal lives through the pandemic, but I think there was a lot of realization when you talk about the workplace therapist show, right? Workplace therapy. There's a lot of people who had a lot of difficulty, not just with the pandemic, but with managing the workplace and the toxicity through that entire process. And so the book actually was pre-pandemic and actually prophesized a lot of what actually happened during and now after the pandemic.
Interesting. So I really want to dig in on that a little bit. But as you were talking, it reminded me of a conversation I had. I was doing a session, this was some years ago, and it was for a financial institution. And one of the people came up after the session during the break and said to me, he said, early in your career, when you're kind of an outperformer, it's like jet fuel, kind of like shoots you up into the atmosphere. Yeah. But then and that's great. He said, but you hit a certain level in the atmosphere and you're flying along and you don't realize that's when you start to encounter friendly fire. Which is, folks that maybe are not so happy that you've gone quite so high in the atmosphere. And so hearing you say that level-based comment definitely illustrates and highlights that point. So what surprises me to hear from you today is that this toxicity, bullying, that kind of non-leader behavior to try and hold other people back, it feels like it's coming from our conversation here today, just as common today as it was pre-pandemic. And why I'm surprised by that is because of the virtual element. Because a lot of times when I think about the toxicity, I think about all the passive aggressive stuff that happens when you're in person with another person. The rolling of eyes, showing up late to meetings. I guess all that stuff can still happen virtually, but I always think of the in-person elements. So I would love to get you to comment a little bit on what you are still seeing and hearing in the workplaces, and then maybe we can pivot to how do we cure for all this?
Yeah, and you're right. Unfortunately, the pandemic actually exacerbated. And what it really proved out is that you don't have to be in person to be bullied, targeted, or abused. In fact, there's a tactic that I talk about in the book called dropping the seed. And that tactic is basically that there are conversations occurring about you really behind your back that you're not privy to, behind closed doors, typically at higher levels, that most of the time are not true. But they're really positioning you in a place that you would never want to be. And you don't know about them, so you have no ability to really address what is being said. So now play that out in a virtual world. So what I find is that is happening more and more often. So instead of kind of the bullying face to face, or the passive aggressive behavior in person, what you're seeing is a lot of this happening offline, is what I would say, and the individuals aren't even privy to the conversation.
Wow. Okay. So, again, I love trying to solve for some of this, but I still feel like before we solve it, we need to get a good handle on what we're solving for. Yeah. So tell me about these individuals. When we think about these folks that are exhibiting these unproductive, toxic behaviors, are there any cues or tells that would allow us to spot them either earlier on or even in our current situation?
Yeah, that's such a great question. So unfortunately, based upon the research, up to 25 to 35% of mid to are extremely toxic to the workplace.
Wow.
And so when you think about that, now couple that with 80% of leaders are good to poor. So we have a leadership issue within our workplaces. Because these individuals get away with these type of tactics, it really starts to proliferate within the organization because they see, individuals think, okay, that's what I need to do in order to get ahead. And it starts tainting your culture. And so there really is this pervasiveness now that's occurring within the workplace and having a very detrimental effect. So what do they look like? So I call them imposter leaders in the book. And that's because they're in leadership positions, again, typically mid to senior levels, but they're really not leaders at all. They're the antithesis of a leader. They're very self-motivated. Some do have mental issues, such as sociopaths, psychopaths, narcissism, which are typically prevalent within that 25 to 35%. The good news for individuals is the imposter leaders have a pattern of behavior. And the reason that it's a pattern is because they continue to build on what they've already done. So they have found some success, let's say, in gaslighting or removing a high performer from their role, maybe subsuming them or their department. And so they found some success in that. So now they'll take it to the next level. They'll either actually go upstream, which is try to tackle someone at a more senior level. Most often they do it at the same level, but they'll continue to use the same tactics. So that's where individuals, if they understand and are aware of the tactics and the processes that these imposter leaders use, you're much more able then to navigate the situation successfully.
Beautiful. I think that's a perfect segue. So let's talk about some of those tactics. What are some of those things that we need to be on the lookout for? And then if you've got any antidotes for those or any ways to kind of stop those in its tracks, I would love to hear those.
Yeah, I think there's a couple. So I don't know if I'm sure that you have heard this, but Webster's Dictionary said that gaslighting was the word of the year in 2022.
Oh, I didn't know that. I didn't know that was the word of the year. That's an unfortunate word to pick. But
isn't that awful? Yeah. Isn't that awful that that's the one word? And so the good news is because of that, and I thank them for that, they're bringing a lot of awareness to what gaslighting actually is. And in the workplace, it happens all the time. So gaslighting, and I go into great detail in the book, but a gaslighting situation may look like where you're in a one-on-one with your leader and you're just having, your general conversation. How did your week go? How's the family? Really making you comfortable initially with the conversation. Then what you're going to find is the pace of the conversation will pick up. And all of a sudden, they'll start playing back to you things that you didn't say. So for example, I understand that you're having difficulty with this project. Are you not able to handle it? I'm hearing that you're not able to handle it. Is that true? And you'll play back and say, no, I think there are some challenges with the project, but here's what I'm thinking about and here's how I'm tackling it. And they'll say, so you're saying that you can't handle it then? And that's the huge cue back to anyone that you are being gaslighted. When someone starts playing back to you something that you've never said, and you have clarified it once, maybe twice, in those situations, you need to understand what's happening. They're trying to put words in your mouth, and the outcome is not going to be good because they're doing it for a reason. So the best thing that you can do in that situation is remove yourself. Even if it's a one-on-one with your boss, check your watch, say, oh, I am so sorry. I actually have something else that I've committed to. I need to go. And get yourself out of those one-on-one situations as much as possible. It's really difficult when it's your leader, but you have to, because the alternative is going to be worse than actually doing that. So gaslighting is a big one today. It's happening both virtually and in person. And then, of course, the second big tactic that I hear about a lot is what I have coined as manufactured conflict.
Oh, interesting.
So that's a situation where someone it actually aligns to the earlier tactic we were talking about called dropping the seed. Manufactured conflict is actually someone gaslighting you, creating conflict with you that has an ulterior motive. So what they want to do is put you in a negative light, put them in a positive light because they want something. And what I found in my research is that unfortunately, 100% of high performers are the ones who are being targeted, bullied, and abused in the workplace. 70% of women and 35% of men. So women are encountering these experiences at twice the rate of men, and people of color are experiencing this at a higher rate than their white counterparts. So if you can believe it, and this was really the biggest aha in the research, is that the higher the performer that you are, so the better you are, the better results that you drive, the better leader that you are to your people, the better developer you are of people, the one who gets the best results in a positive way, you have a target on your back. You will be targeted and bullied and abused 100% of the time during your career.
Wow. Okay. So what's interesting to hear you talk about this, particularly the manufactured conflict and how it correlates to kind of moving up in your career. Mm-hmm. I'd be curious to your thoughts around how common you see that as you get closer to the C-suite. Because then it's so often the role of those individuals is the function, and functions have natural tensions, right? Sales and marketing are not always going to get along with finance or operations. Right. One's a gas pedal, one's a brake pedal. It's designed that way.
Right.
But it's easy to say, well, the reason why I didn't deliver results is because that person over there, they've been causing problems. They're not playing nice in the sandbox. And if their people would only do such and such, then. So do you see that as a little more common or pervasive as you start to, as your identity starts to get associated with a function?
It's definitely more pervasive the higher you go. And I think what I have found, though, is that the difference in those C-suites between healthy conflict, because sometimes, like you said, healthy conflict can be healthy and it can actually create better outcomes. Then there's the manufactured conflict, which is creating conflict for their own personal gain.
Exactly.
The difference between the two, a lot of times, is the leader. Leaders who can spot manufactured conflict and dissolve the issue fairly immediately, those individuals typically leave the team. They will leave the organization, they will leave the division because they cannot carry out their personal plan. And so that's where CEOs and leaders, executives need to be very keen on what these tactics are and not to trust, unfortunately, everyone's behavior on their team. And that's unfortunately what you find is that the higher you go, typically the executives are aligned to a particular leader. Sometimes leaders move companies that bring some of their team along with them, and they really believe everything that they say. And unfortunately, you do want to trust your team. But what executives have to remember, and the best ones do this, They remember that everyone comes to them through their own lens. And a lot of times that's personally driven.
So let's talk about that manufactured conflict, because I've often found with some of my clients that have encountered that, if they're pretty high up in the altitude of the organization, they don't want to tap the shoulder of the president or the CEO and say, hey, help me with this. They feel like it's their job to resolve this themselves.
Right.
And if they can avoid that noise to the CEO and the president, even better. So I don't know what you would counsel, but what would, if let's say we're a vice president and we're starting to encounter this, well, how should we approach it? What's the right strategy?
I talk to executives every day that are going through this, and you're exactly right. They don't want to go to their boss and say, hey, Joe over here is actually, telling you things that aren't true. I think he's manufacturing conflict because he wants my division. Okay, they don't have time for that, right? And you can't really go to HR because they neither have the resources or the information or the education to actually help you through it. So what I'm finding is that most executives know if you're going to achieve that level and you're going to have a great deal of success, you have to talk to someone about this. And a lot of times your spouse is a good one to listen, but they really don't know how to help you unless they're at an equal level, maybe within or without outside the industry. And so a lot of individuals obviously are at that level, find a coach who can help them through that, who can help them work through and identify what the conflict actually is and how best to successfully resolve it while maintaining a relationship. I think where it gets really, really dicey and difficult is that most individuals that are targeted, so these are the high performers, they play the game above board. They're ethical, they're truthful. That unfortunately doesn't play well when the game being played against you is unethical, manufactured conflict. And so, but again, I always coach my executives to take the high road. Even if it doesn't work out in this particular situation, your career is made up of a lot of opportunities to do the wrong thing. Doing the right thing is what you should always choose to do.
Beautiful. I love that. I was thinking as you were kind of saying that I think part of the opportunity for any kind of high performer in field dealing with these situations is while they are playing above board and we want to play above board, they're also predictable. So I'm wondering if there's a way where we can play above board, but be unpredictable enough that it throws off kind of these imposter leaders. Because as you mentioned earlier on, which I think is so true, they've got a game plan they're executing off of.
Yeah.
And it's predicated on us reacting a certain way to their game plan. So I don't know if what I just said there makes any sense, but if it does, I would love to get your thoughts on what are some ways we can kind of throw those imposter leaders off their plan a little bit.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I've actually had, as I was rising through the ranks, I really got some bad advice. And bad advice I would throw into the camp of, oh, just ignore them. People know what they're all about. Just ignore them and do your thing. All the way down to the other bad advice, which is go head to head with them and let them know that you mean business. Both are it's really, really bad advice to do either one of those. And so what you find yourself is in the middle. And you do have to navigate it successfully, but you have to do it. I always coach my executives to look at it for what it really is. What are they really trying to go after? What is the end result that they're trying to achieve? Because gaslighting and dropping the seed and manufactured conflict are all the tactics to ultimately get to an end result. And a lot of times you don't know what that end result is until you've kind of gone through this process a couple of different times. So that's what you have to manage. That's what throws them off their game, is if you know what the end result is that they're trying to achieve. Number two, don't get so involved in them and driving your energy towards them that you forget to perform, because that's exactly what they want you to do. They're waiting for you to trip up. They're waiting for you to make a mistake so that they can come in and say, see, I said she wasn't all that she's cracked up to be, or he's all cracked up what he's supposed to be. He's not really a high performer. We should take him off the list. So always focus first and foremost on performing. No one can ever take away a great resume. So don't ever give them the satisfaction of not performing your job to the best of your ability.
Is there any value in getting executive level sponsors or advocates or folks that are, in those meetings behind closed doors? So when they do try and either manufacture conflict or they're dropping those seeds, that there's a person there that can either give you information or gently shut it down. Would there be value in finding those kinds of allies?
Absolutely. And again, this is particularly true for women and people of color, that you do need to go. I always encourage to go to people that you trust and to ask them how best to navigate a situation. I've always encouraged them to present it as a possible situation or something that you may potentially want to avoid. I rarely ask them to ever disclose what you're actually going through, because most people don't want to carry that and have the burden of carrying you into the conversation. Keep in mind, they're probably going through the same thing at their level as well. So find someone that you can trust. There are always people at senior levels who are trustworthy, who will advocate for you at the table, who need to know that type of information. So find them and do disclose certain information. But again, I'm always very wary of encouraging them to tell the exact story.
I agree completely. And I think there's a great way to package that. It's always safe to package it under the umbrella of alignment. Yeah. I want to improve my alignment with IT and the leader there. I want to improve my alignment with finance, and would love to get your counsel on how you think I could do that best.
Yes.
Because
and if there's a challenge of XYZ, how would you navigate that? Like, have you seen that before? Where have others been successful? And you're exactly right. Coach to where you want to go, not where they want to drag you to.
Yeah. And I think I want to go back to it because it's such an important point. You said, of course, don't just ignore them because you allow them to just keep having that mouthpiece, which I think is so true. But also, going head to head is not a wise decision. And I think there's a lot of people that think maybe that is. And the reason why that's not a wise decision is if they truly have some level of narcissism as part of their traits and components, they are masters of emotional manipulation. So you are going into battle inside their dojo. Probably not a good idea. So You'll get heated and they'll just have a big smile on their face and say, I don't know why you're getting so worked up. We're just having a conversation. You seem to be really losing your cool. And so keeping yourself calm is so important in these situations.
It is. And that's why with a narcissist, I always say, just turn into ice. Do not be cool, calm, collected. Do not let anything penetrate you. Your thoughts, your words, and ask lots of questions. And I think that also throws these individuals off their game, because if they're accusing you of something that is not true, asking them a question back, and that's also a telltale sign if you're getting gaslighted, is if you ask a very good question back to them and they don't answer it or they avoid answering it, then you know you're in a sticky situation and you need to get out.
Yeah, beautiful. This has been great. So what areas have we not covered that we should have? Can you think of anything else that might be helpful for the listeners today? So they're outperformers, they're encountering some of these challenges as they're trying to navigate their way to leading the team and leading their organizations. Anything else we haven't talked about?
5 minutes.
I don't think so. I mean, I just want to reiterate, if you have all the characteristics of a great leader, right? If you're ambitious and you have intellect and you have character and ethics and integrity and you love leading people and driving great results, you will have a target on your back. Know that happens, be aware of it, and prepare for it. It's the best possible thing that you can do to be a successful executive these days.
Have you ever seen a case, Berta, where someone has taken one of these possible saboteurs or adversaries and flip them into an ally or an advocate?
Not successfully.
Okay.
So I think some have attempted before they have come to me. And I think what they have found is the exact situation that you have talked about, which is it gets played against them. Because the thing about a narcissist or someone with sociopathic or psychopathic tendencies is that every conversation is to find out more about you to benefit them. And so you really have to be careful. Now, if it's a healthy conflict situation and the other individual and you just don't agree on something, and you have to work through it, you have to talk through it, but you both want the same end result, which is the best result for the company and the clients and your people, yes, those are the situations where you can create a better relationship after. But if you're dealing with someone who has their own personal interest in mind, absolutely not. Play it cool, try to get through the situation and come out unscathed.
Yeah, my experience has been very similar. I haven't had any cases where people have been able to get them to completely turn, but I didn't know if that was just my experience. What I have seen, probably the best outcome if the individual does have the narcissistic, sociopathic kind of tendencies, best outcome is they move on to somebody else. I mean, I hate to say it that way, but that tends to be the best outcome. In the cases where I've had clients that have gotten one of those individuals off their back, they didn't necessarily stop doing that behavior. They just stopped doing that behavior directed towards them. And they went on to another department or another person, some other entity that they chose to target.
Yeah, and what you find a lot of times, in almost every conversation, I get why are they doing this to me? Why isn't someone stopping them? I'm going to battle this. I'm going to persevere. And my first response is get away from them as fast as you can. Because no one wins in this situation. Because they are going to drive it home until they finish the job. And you're exactly right. If you remove yourself from the situation, they will go on to something or someone else, which still isn't the right thing. But that then becomes an HR issue. That's not your issue.
Right. Berta, this has been absolutely fantastic, extremely enlightening for me and I know the listeners. So I always ask all my guests on the Workplace Therapist Show, I always ask this final question. What's one life hack you might have for us to how we can either have healthier relationships or better conversations, either at work or at home?
Great question. I would say do not absorb other people's bad behavior. Put a shield up, try to better understand what their motivations are, what their end game is, and don't play their game.
Beautiful. And I think that's such a nice tie-in to what we've talked about here today.
It is.
So if people want to learn more about you, follow you, buy multiple copies of your book to give out to friends and family and colleagues, where can they go?
Amazon, I think, is the best place, although you can certainly buy it wherever books are sold. Barnes & Noble, Target, Walmart, as well as Amazon. And of course, if you want to connect with me, you can find me on Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram, or you can certainly go to bertaaldrich.com.
Berta, this has been an absolute pleasure and joy. Thank you for all your insights and guidance. I greatly appreciate it.
Of course, it's been such a pleasure. And thank you. Continue your great work.
Thank you. I will. I absolutely loved that conversation with Berta. It fits so neatly on our conversation last week with Susan Barber, where we talked about visibility. So now that we've achieved visibility, we've gotten ourselves promoted, Berta reminds us that no one told her that once you get into those senior roles, you are almost 100% guaranteed to run into someone who's going to try and block your progress. They could be abusive and bullying, or they could just be an adversary. And Berta reminds us that we need to be on the lookout for those folks. And to help us, she says there's really two things you want to look out for. First, gaslighting behavior. So that behavior when they make up a story or pretend like you said something that you didn't say, trying to either get you to agree to that or get you emotionally unsettled. She says walk away from those individuals or those situations. The second one she reminds us of is manufactured conflict. I love this idea. And she said, this is when they will tell a story to someone else, putting you in a position of a negative light and them in a positive light, trying to not only put you in a bad light, but get something for themselves. Maybe it's your department or more responsibilities, or they're seen as the golden child, whatever it happens to be, but they tell these stories. And so Berta reminds us that even in these situations, we want to be careful. So she gives us a few tips. She says, if you do encounter these kinds of individuals, she said some of the bad advice she's gotten over the years is that don't just ignore them because they'll keep going. She also said, don't go in headstrong and say, I'm going to have it out with them and have a conflict, because these folks are masters at conflict and masters at manipulating emotion. So she said the best thing to do is kind of work behind the scenes on some of these, get yourself a third-party advisor to help you navigate so you can ultimately remove them and stay focused more on the great work that you and your team are doing. So I highly encourage you to pick up a copy of Berta's work. And if you get a chance, re-listen to this show. There's so many great tips that Berta gives us to allow us to navigate that conflict so we can create those healthy environments for ourselves and our teams that the world so desperately needs.